I think when you think about Purim, we know there's four main mitzvos that are all mentioned in the Megillah. You have the reading of the Megillah, the meal, the Seudah, the Mishloach Manos, and the Matanos Evyonim. And of course, all of these mitzvos are D'Rabbanan, because the way you remember that the Purim story happened after Har Sinai. So the mitzvos are D'Rabbanan. They're considered to be a little bit more important than the average D'Rabbanan because they're mentioned in the Tanakh. Because the Megillah Esther in the 9th parak talks about these tells us to do these mitzvahs, so they're considered to be divrei Kabbalah. They were told Baruch HaKodesh, but they're D'Rabbanan. So the first thing you really want to think about is, why do we have these mitzvahs on this particular holiday? Two of them are pretty obvious. The reading of the Megillah is pretty obvious, that you read the Megillah to tell the story of why we have this holiday, right? So that's pretty obvious. And the Seudah also is pretty obvious, because every time we celebrate a happy day, we have a Seudah. So those two mitzvahs are pretty obvious. The other two mitzvahs, it's hard to sometimes think about, what if I didn't grow up keeping Purim? Like, you can't really imagine Purim without Mishloach Manos. But I mean, we could, because we've done it once. But really, like, what does Mishloach Manos have to do with Purim? That's one question. And the second question is, what does Matanos Evyonim have to do with Purim? Like, these are things that are very nice things to do. Obviously, Matanos Evyonim is tzedakah, so it's a good thing to do all the time. But why particularly on Purim? And the same thing with Mishloach Manos. Let's start with Matanos Evyonim, which I think the Rambam gives us a clue into understanding why we have Matanos Evyonim on Purim. The Rambam said this. I always quote this Rambam. A lot of people quote it because it's a very beautiful Rambam. But I want to just focus in really on what the Rambam thinks the purpose of this mitzvah is on this holiday. Mutav la'adam laharbos b'matanos evyonim milaharbos b'sudasa u'b'shloch manos l'reyav. It's better to do more matanos evyonim than to do more suda or more mishloach manos. She'ein sham simcha gedola mufu'ara, because there's no greater simcha other than bringing joy to the poor, the orphan, the widow, and the stranger or convert. Because if you can bring happiness to these people, then we are like Hashem. We're like God. God also brings happiness and joy and life to people who need it. So we become godly when we give tzedakah. So, Rambam is like a real big plug for Matanos Evyonim. So it's possible that he's saying that there's like 4 equal mitzvahs on Purim, and one of them has this other dimension, which it also makes you godly. So happens to be, right? Or it could be that he's doing more than that, and he's saying that this is really, he's giving us the reason why we have this mitzvah on Purim. She'ein sham simcha gedola u'for'ara. There's no greater simcha. So if it's supposed to be Yimei Mishta v'Simcha, it's supposed to be a day of Simcha. What the Rambam is saying, I think, is that the way to get the best Simcha is to give Matanos Evyonim. Because the Simcha is richer when we're also giving to others. When we if you just imagine yourself going to your house and you're alone, you just take a lot of food and you just stuff your mouth. It could be delicious, but it doesn't feel so awesome, right? It feels awesome if you go to a dinner with other people. So in the same way, when you're sharing and you're giving charity on the same day that you're celebrating yourself, it makes your simcha more elevated.
You don't walk around. I just gave $50 to my parents. For instance, you pat yourself on the back, or is it just a quiet type?
Well, I think the Rambam, it's an interesting question. The Rambam doesn't really give any clues. He just says you give it to others. He doesn't say how you gave it to the others, right? Did you give them a job? Did you give it to them in quiet? They didn't see you didn't see them, etc. But I think the Rambam would say, like, all those scales can apply here also, but they're all ways of doing tzedakah. But if you're doing tzedakah, then you're having a greater simcha, and it could be that the Rambam is trying to tell us that the reason for Matanas Evyonim is for the purpose of elevating our simcha. Now let's talk about Mishloach Manos. Mishloach Manos, I think, is the biggest mystery. Why? Why not? Every day you should give Mishloach Manos. Why not give a present? Oh, there we go. We have a Machlokas Achronim. The Chassam Sofer quotes two opinions. One of them is the Shumas Hadeshen, and one of them is the Manas Halevi. So the Shumas Hadeshen, but I'm just trying to say the reason why we have two opinions here is because it's not so obvious. It's not so obvious why you would just give a gift randomly to two people or to one person. So the Shumas Hadeshen says the reason is because we want to make sure everyone has enough food for the Seudah. But what? So why don't you just give more Matanas Evyonim? So he says that we want to make sure everyone has food for the Seudah, but we don't want to embarrass the people who will be shamed by taking the tzedakah. So therefore, we legislate that everyone gives to everyone, and then there won't be any shame in it. So it's basically like it's like this, like the box, right? Oh, the food is ready.
Yeah, it's like I'm giving you money. You have to go make a food in the house.
So, okay, very good. So Matanas Evyonim gives the poor money, but not necessarily for the Seudah today. They'll probably save it for their next thing. So this is actually for the Seudah. But by giving it so why don't you give Mishloach Manos to the poor, right? So by giving it to everybody, it's really a non-efficient way of making sure that the poor have enough food, but it's more dignified because it ensures that no one will know who needs it and who's just taking it. And the Shumas Hadeshen says, if this is the reason, so let's say someone comes and says, I want to give you Mishloach Manos. So you say, thank you so much. I really appreciate it, but I'm okay. I have enough candy. So he says, you don't get the mitzvah. Because the whole purpose is to make sure you have food for the Seudah. If you say, I'm mochel, you didn't get the mitzvah. And he says, even if you have food, you shouldn't be mochel. That takes away from the mitzvah because then that causes the busha. Because if you're mochel, then you start to blow the cover of the people who need it. So, okay, that's what the Shumas Hadeshen says. The Manas Halevi says what Eli started to say, that we want to be marbe shalom v'reus. We want to create a lot of goodwill amongst the community. People should feel really close to each other, and you're giving presents, you're getting presents. Hepech me regilaso shalatzar. To do the opposite of our enemy, sha'amar mefuzar u'mefurad. Perush b'makom shera'ui lios am echad hina mefuzarim ufuradim b'machlokas. When they should have been unified, you know what the problem was in the story of Purim? Or he's quoting Haman. I'm not sure if Haman created this or just described it, but he said that they're disparate, that they're dispersed, they're divided and bifurcated, and he said that that's a critique. They should have been more united. So, therefore, to compensate for that failing and that problem, tiknu mishloach manos. So he says, if so, the Chassam Sofer says, if that's the reason, if you're mochel, if someone says, here, I bought you this present, you go, thank you so much, but it's okay, I'm good, you keep it. No, you keep it. So he says, you're yotze. As long as you gave it, the person doesn't have to actually receive it because you already affected that goal of creating ahava v'achva. So he said that's the two opinions, and that's the nafkamina, whether mechila is okay. this is really a drush on the pasuk in Esther. What happened in Esther is that Haman comes to Achashverosh and he says, "Listen, there's an am fuzar mufrad ben amim, datehem shonos min datei hamelech, ein shovel hanicham." We have to get rid of them. So, really, he's just describing the Jewish people. There's this population that's spread throughout the kingdom, and we should get rid of them because they're different than us. But the midrash and this whole tradition, and Eli just said it like it's obvious, right? Like the Vazar Mufurad is like the whole thing, like the whole theme of the Megillah. That their divisiveness was like a real source for our downfall, our danger, the reason why we were at risk, because we have this fatal flaw that we can't get along. But what happens? How does Esther combat the threat? Lech kenosis kol hayudim. Bring all the people together. They all came together. Unity of mission, unity of spirit. Am echad, and then we won. So it's a story about disunity and unity. I'll agree that you have a lot of these words, and the mefuzar, mefurad is also like it's doubled, it's emphasized, and the knos, but it's really not what the Megillah. It's not so obvious that that's really happening in the Megillah. But I want to elaborate a little bit more on this theme of the unity and disunity of the Jewish people. I do think that this is a true theme of the Megillah, but I want to suggest that it's not as simple as like this fatal flaw and this solution. And it's completely parallel to another time in Jewish history when we have this emphasis on unity in contrast to the disunity that preceded it. And that is, and there's anyone know what I'm thinking about? And we know that Megillah's Esther, Kimu v'kiblu haYehudim. We have another, Chazal tell us that we got the Torah at Har Sinai, Chazal say, but our acceptance was flawed because the mountain was over our head, and God said, accept the mountain, or I'm going to drop the mountain on your head. So we said, Na'aseh v'nishma, but it wasn't completely willingly. So therefore, there's a second acceptance of the Torah in the time of Esther. Kimu v'kiblu haYehudim, the Chazal say, even though the pshat means that they accepted to celebrate this holiday, Chazal say they kimu masha kiblu kfar. They reaffirmed their previous Kabbalah and accepted the Torah now of free will. So anyway, at Har Sinai, the first time we did this, what happened? Vayichan sham Yisrael neged har. The Jewish people encamped by the mountain. Chazal say, Rashi quotes it, Ki ish echad b'leiv echad. Vayichan is in the singular. If you look preceding that singular encampment, Vayis'u ma'Refidim, they traveled with Refidim, Vayavo midbar Sinai, Vayachanu b'midbar, Vayichan sham Yisrael neged har. So 3 verbs in a row are in the plural, and then it switches Vayichan in the singular neged har. And not only that, if you look in Maseh, Vayasu, Vayachanu, it's all in the plural. The only time it's in the singular is at Har Sinai. So Chazal say, Rashi quotes in the Chumash, that when they came to Har Sinai, they were Ki ish echad b'leiv echad, they were completely unified. In contrast, all the other encampments were in Taromes Umachlokas. They were always divided in all other encampments. So you have this parallel, I think. You have the 2 Kabbalas Torahs. You have the Kabbalas Torah of Har Sinai, you have the Kabbalas Torah of Esther. In both cases, it starts off with this like terrible divisiveness, and then at the critical moments, we come together and, Ki ish echad b'leiv echad, Kenosis kol hayudim, and we had a Yeshua. And I always think about it, it's like, you're going somewhere important, and your parent, I'm the kid now, and your parents are like, you're fighting the whole way with your sibling. And they go, when we get there, you better stop fighting. You can't be fighting when we visit this person, or like when the pictures are coming, everyone's smiling and hugging. But so the whole day you're fighting, but at the one moment when they're taking the pictures at the wedding, everyone's smiling and hugging. So that's what it's like. The Jewish people, we're fighting all the time. We never agree. But at that critical moment, you're at Har Sinai, you can fight all you want. You get to Har Sinai, you are all saying it together. Ki ish echad b'leiv echad. And similarly, it's like now Esther says, this is the critical moment. Like, this really, really matters. Get it together, otherwise we're finished. Okay. That's one way of like thinking about this whole theme. But I think there's another way of thinking about it. And that is that, why don't we be so embarrassed about the fact that we always argue with each other? Like maybe that's our charm. Maybe God wants it to be that way. Why? Maybe he created a world and a Torah which could be understood in multiple ways. And he created people different one from their other in our temperament and our outlook and our way of thinking. So I don't think it was like a tragedy that like I thought you'd all agree about everything. Turns out you only can agree about one thing and disagree about everything else. Could be that God wanted us to have different opinions about issues. And that's not the problem. The only problem is if you can't resolve them. But if you could disagree and find a way to resolve it and come to a way of making decisions, then it wouldn't be so bad that we're disagreeing. And the allowance for different views can actually be a source of our strength and not our weakness. And I think it's actually very particular that the time of Esther is considered to be this time when everyone was disunified. And I mean, we always are disunified. I mean, we know we always fight with each other, but I would say that in particular, it makes sense that the time of Purim was a time where there's very big arguments. And that's because this is the first time that we don't have Nevuah. This is the first time in Jewish history when we don't have a Navi who could tell us, Hashem told me this. Esther and Mordechai, they're considered Nevi'im, but they didn't really have direct messages from God. So it wasn't like God told Mordechai, tell Esther. Like imagine if it was Sefer Malachim or Sefer Yeshayahu. So God would tell the prophet to tell the king to do this. So God would say, tell Mordechai, tell Esther to go marry the king. Do reveal your identity, don't reveal your identity, bow down, don't bow down. God would tell him all these things. And that didn't happen. And therefore, I mean, Chazal say that the other Chachamim at the time just didn't always agree with what Mordechai was doing. And it could be that, and it makes sense, that the second that God hides himself and stops telling us everything and leaves it to us, we're going to have different opinions. So it could be that the Mufuzar Umfurad Ben Amim is also reflecting the fact that this is the first time that we have just the people spread out and we need to argue it out ourselves. And how did they get unified? We got unified because because why? There's an external threat, an existential threat that was threatening to destroy the entire nation, that we were all in it together on this issue. So there's no different views. It's inescapable to unify around this cause. And therefore, it's not saying that just in the nick of time they got together. It's because this is the one issue, or I'll say one of the two, but one issue where we can't have the debate. We can't say, I don't care about the lives of the Jewish community. That's not something that we can have a discussion about. That's something that all Jews need to be fully committed to. And therefore, the Kenos as Kol HaYehudim is to say, not to repair the flaw of the arguments, but rather to say, this is the limit of where we can argue. The same thing happens at Har Sinai. Har Sinai comes to tell us that all other encampments are full of debate. All other issues you can argue and discuss and debate. But there's one issue that there can't be any debate about, and that is, do you accept the Torah? And on that issue, there has to be a complete unity. And that is the Ish Echad B'Lev Echad. So you have the two Kabbalas HaTorahs with the two moments of unity around the two issues that we must be unified about. Rav Soloveitchik wrote a great book called Fate and Destiny, essay called Odido Fake. And in it, he talks about the covenant of fate and the covenant of destiny. And what he means by that is that the covenant of destiny means that all Jews have like a bond to each other because we have the same belief system. Like we have the same destiny. We believe in the Torah. We believe in the common values of the Torah. And in that way, all Jews are connected to one another in that we all believe in the same thing. That's the covenant of destiny. The covenant of faith is the fact that all Jews realize that we have the same fate in terms of our lives. Our lives are tied to one another, and on a survival level, we are all in it together. And he sets it up that Shavuos is when we created this covenant of destiny, where we all bound together to accept the Torah. And Pesach was the covenant of fate, in the sense that, like, we're all slaves, we're all free, we're all in it together. And I think we can add to that if Har Sinai was a covenant of destiny, then Purim was a covenant of fate. Purim is a time that we realized that our lives were tied together. And, if we don't all daven together, we're all going to be dead. That's the covenant of fate. And the two moments of unity in Jewish history, to be contrasted with all the other disunity, is the two times that we forged these two bonds with the Jewish people. And Soloveitchik goes on to say something very important, which is that there are some Jews who buy into the covenant of destiny, that they feel like, our religion, the Torah, we all have to be committed to it. That's what makes us one nation. But they don't necessarily have a vested interest in helping the lives of other people. And then you have people who are the opposite, people who don't necessarily believe in the religion, Jews who don't necessarily practice halacha, but they'll give their life to save the life of another Jew. And, we need both. We need to forge both the covenant of fate and the covenant of destiny. And the double Kabbalah Torah is the Kabbalah Torah of Har Sinai, is that we're all bound by the same religion. And the covenant of Purim is that Knossos Kol Yehudim, we recognize that our lives are tied to all Jews. That if Jews are in danger in one place in the world, it affects the Jews throughout the world, because we're actually in danger. If the security is achieved in one place, it can help the security of all the Jews. And we're tied together because we feel that the pain of one Jew is felt by all the Jewish people. And that, to feel that, is to subscribe to the covenant of fate, that I think that really Purim celebrates the unity of Kenosis Kol Yehudim that we're achieving through the Mishlach Manos, to counter the Mefuzar Mufurad. On this issue, we all came together. And there's also a very interesting thing. I think this theme is highlighted in the very first Mishnah in Maseches Megillah. I always think it's interesting to see what the Mishnah decides to start the Masechta with. Which halacha of Purim is going to be the first one. And there's really options. It could be there's a Mishnah that talks about how much of the Megillah you have to read. That would be a pretty good thing to talk about. What do you read on Purim from the Megillah? There could be a Mishnah, what's a kosher Megillah? Which the Mishnah decides to talk about not the what do you do, but not the how do you do it, but the when do you do it. What's the date of Purim? That's the first topic of the first Mishnah Maseches Megillah. And it's fascinating that there's, I don't want to hold you fast longer, but there's actually 5 days of Purim, but we don't keep all those days because they used to allow small villages to read it earlier on the Yom HaKnisa. But we still have 2 days of Purim, because we have Purim and Shushan Purim. And I always thought it was really striking that they made a holiday with 2 different days. I always feel the biggest miracle of Jewish history is that all Jews have the same calendar. I mean, it's literally a miracle that there's not one Jewish denomination that has anything moved to a different day. No one moved a holiday to a Sunday. No one moved any of the holidays. And the way we get our calendar is so complex, it would have been very easy to come up with another calculation to have another day. And the unity of our calendar is really, like I said, I think it's a miracle and it's really helpful. I'm sure a lot of you have used it at work, and you're like, I'm not coming to work tomorrow because it's not Jewish holiday, Shavuot. And they're like, that's not a real holiday. And you're like, no, it really is a holiday. And then like the next week, your Jewish colleague is like, no, I'm not coming today because it's Shavuot. He's like, well, the other guy came last week, told me it was Shavuot. Oh, well, he's, he belongs to that community. I belong to a different community. So it's amazing that we have one calendar, and it really helps us feel like we're one religion and one nation. So it's striking that Chazal set up Purim with 2 days. And why are there 2 days? Because in Shushan, the war lasted 1 day longer. So I say, choose one of the days. Either say we started to win on the 14th outside of Shushan, so we'll celebrate the 14th, or say we'll celebrate the 15th when the war was over for everybody. It's like having, you celebrate the end of a war. Of course, there's different battles within the war. You don't celebrate a day for each battle in that city where that battle happens. So I think it highlights, and it's alluded to in the Megillah, that you should make this a holiday, bizmanehem, in their times, in the plural. And I think it also is coming to highlight the fact that that there could be a lot of diversity, a lot of various ways of thinking about life and about religion, and that's something that we celebrate and are proud of, but we're also committed to the 2 core pillars that we all have to believe in, and in a unified way, which is our theology, our religion, and our commitment to the lives of one another as a nation. We'll done, Marv, in a minute, and wish everyone a good Purim.